Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. One of the joys of being a member of Parliament is that you always get to learn about issues that you may not otherwise have had you not been in this place. And for me, I've been learning a little bit about diafiltered milk, having met with the Canadian dairy farmers earlier this year, and now on the occasion of this very well-worded, specific, concrete motion that's been brought to the House on how to actually fix this, Madam Speaker. So the problem, as I understand it, is that there are rules for composition for cheese in Canada, and certain milk proteins like diafiltered milk are being used and counted against the allotment for actual milk, when in fact they aren't milk. How do we know they're not milk? Because the Canadian Border Services Agency says they aren't milk, and they don't charge duties on it as they charge on milk. And so this is really just an instance of government needing to appreciate and understand its own rules that are clearly written for the importation of milk proteins, and then recognizing that and following through on that when it comes to the way our cheese is being produced. And when they fail to do that, as they have been, what that means is that producers there's a competitive pressure to use the cheaper product, and it's cheaper because it's able to be imported without the same duties as other milk. And so when that's counted against the quota, Madam Speaker, for milk, that means that Canadian milk, which would otherwise be used for that purpose, is at a competitive disadvantage. So all we're asking is that the rules be fairly enforced so that Canadian producers can sell the milk that they produce that actually meets the requirements and can get the economic benefit of that, and so that those dollars that are being spent can be reinvested in Canadian communities instead of shipped out to the United States. And I think that's a laudable goal, Madam Speaker. It's why, incidentally, when we talk about larger trade agreements, and there's mention of those here, I'm often concerned because those agreements tend to tighten the noose on whether it's Canadian producers in the agricultural sector or Canadian workers. They, in similar ways, create competitive pressures that either price those Canadian goods out of the market or cause the work and the jobs to essentially leave Canada. You know, we're seeing something similar in the TPP, although it works in a different way with the provisions on temporary foreign workers, Madam Speaker, where you create pressures by allowing companies to bring in workers who can be sent back at any point by their employer and are therefore concerned about complaining about their wages and complaining about working conditions. You create downward pressure on the expectations of Canadian workers, and it's just one more way in which certain kinds of trade agreements end up not benefiting Canadians. And if they're not benefiting Canadians, or at least Canadian workers and Canadian producers, there may be some few Canadians at the top that make obscene amounts of money because of market access. But if it's not being spread around, I've always, well, not only wondered, but not been able to answer the question why we should get excited about supporting agreements that may produce enormous amounts of wealth for a select few Canadians while putting many other Canadians out of jobs or forcing them to work for lower wages and lower benefits, Madam Speaker. So, and I think it's important when the government says that it wants to support supply management. I mean, certainly we heard for a long time from Liberal members in the Canadian Wheat Board debate that they were supporters of supply management for Canadian wheat farmers. It's not just about what legislation you bring to the House. It's also about what else you're doing, you know, so to speak. Your right hand has to be talking to your left hand or vice versa, Madam Speaker. So here's an example where we have a government that says we support supply management, but then they turn a blind eye to the enforcement of their own regulations. The practical implication of which is to undercut Canadian supply managed producers. So if you want to say you support supply management, that's one thing. But if you want to do something about it, you could pass this motion and you could follow through on it, because that is what supporting supply management really looks like. It looks like undertaking to do things, particularly the easiest things, which are just to enforce your own regulations to make sure that you're not putting Canadian producers in an unreasonable competitive disadvantage, Madam Speaker. So that's why I was disappointed to see that Liberal members are not standing up to support this. My understanding is that it was an election commitment of theirs. They said within 100 days of being elected that they would solve this problem. It's an easy problem to solve. It just requires enforcing. Yeah, you can imagine how they came to have it as an election commitment, because it might have been the kind of thing that comes to a war room and people are discussing it and they say, oh, so all we have to do is enforce our own standards? Yeah, make that promise. That's an easy one. We can do that. That's no problem. I don't understand how it became so difficult to enforce just because they won the election. It was an easy commitment to make because it's the right thing to do, because it's a matter of simply enforcing regulations that are already on the books, Madam Speaker. And it's mysterious to me why it is that that we aren't already doing that. And in case members are worrying that I'm going on at length and they're going to have to listen to me for a full 20 minutes, I'd like to let you know, Madam Speaker, that I'm going to be splitting my time with the member from Windsor West.
Better have said that.
And,
for 20.
you know, so I'll put the members in the House at ease by letting them know that I will be splitting my time and that this is not a 20-minute speech. Although I could go on, Madam Speaker. I could go on. But I won't. I won't. I'm looking to see if there's someone who was with me in committee earlier today. They were starting to wonder if I might never stop speaking, Madam Speaker. But when you're making a good argument and you're making it about something important, you need to make sure that everything gets said and that it gets said well, and sometimes it takes time to do that. Thankfully today it won't take too long, because I know the member from Windsor West is excited to make good arguments as well, Madam Speaker. So this is really the issue. I mean, it's one of those ones that just boggles the mind because it's simple. It was a clear election commitment. It's about enforcing regulations that are already on the book. We already have the capacity to do this. It means simply keeping money in Canada and standing up for Canadian producers instead of standing up for American producers and allowing that money to go elsewhere. We've heard from producers themselves that this is something that they want. My understanding is not only the producers who make the milk, but those who make the cheese. So if everyone is on the same page, the only people who aren't on this page that I can tell are the American producers and the Liberal government. And I just don't understand how they're the ones getting together on this. Why don't the Liberals stand up and vote with the rest of Canada that is concerned about this issue? And then we can move forward and we can talk about all the many other issues that there are to discuss, Madam Speaker. And with that, I'll finish. Thank you.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Spadina, Fort York.
Part of the challenge we face here is that for the last decade, the law has not been enforced. And the official opposition can cry all they want about this, but they're literally crying over spilt milk. If they had done anything on this file in 10 years, we would not be having this dispute today. So now we find ourselves in a situation where we have imports that are quite obviously in contravention of rules, and we are trying to figure out how to exit from that situation, which was what the promise was. If you read what the promise was, it was to resolve the issue. It was not as described by the member opposite. I understand how you can draw the same conclusion as to the result we're trying to get to, but the process we promised, which is important, was that we would resolve this issue. In light of the fact there are cheese producers in Quebec, in other parts of this country, that are currently under contract and involved in trade where this really wrong practice has been allowed to be moved forward. In light of the fact that those contracts are there, would you not recognize that exiting out of this situation, rather than just simply enforcing and cutting off supply to cheesemakers and to the people employed in that industry, requires us to evolve a solution to make sure that we don't disrupt every company in the process and get to the right place the right way so that we have a permanent solution to this rather than just simply throwing enforcement at the issue?
The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Well, I would say two things in reply, Madam Speaker. The first of all is that I would think a little over 6 months ago, Liberals were saying, if they were saying anything about this, if the previous government wasn't enforcing it, that was the case for a new government, Madam Speaker. So Canadians got a new government now, and I think they want some follow-through. I would say with respect to the promise that from what I've seen, the Liberals have been masters. They were in the election campaign, and we're seeing the truth of it now that they're in government, of putting a promise on paper. We've heard it with the Prime Minister around save door-to-door delivery. Oh, well, you know, don't pay attention to what I said. Go read the fine print on the website. We've seen it with public servants where an expectation was made that they would be treated with respect. And although through C5, they're removing the legislative mechanism to enforce a solution. They came back to the bargaining table with the same offer. The Liberals have been masters of creating promises that in the letter are very limited, but in the spirit and in the impression that they made in the minds of Canadians were quite significant. And this would be another issue where I think they created an expectation, and now they're saying, read the fine print.
Comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman. That's a way to get yourself on.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank my friend from Elmwood Transcona for his speech. And I know that you don't get to that stature without drinking a little bit of milk. So, you know, it is, and you got to strengthen those bones. Now, I know a lot of people know me in here for the work that I do on the Defence Committee, but back in 2006 to 2008 in the 40th Parliament, I served as chair of the Agriculture Committee, and of course, am a beef cattle operator before politics. And before BSE ran a livestock export company that predominantly moved dairy cattle. And I can tell you that protecting supply management is critical to the success of our dairy farms right across this country. And that's why our processors need to work with our dairy farmers to get the products they need, rather than going the back door and trying to violate the import system and bringing in derivative products like we're seeing right now and undermining our overall supply management system. So I want to say that I'm proud to be supporting the motion that's before the House today.
The honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Well, thank you. I'm gonna divine a question out of that, Madam Speaker, and proceed to answer it.
Choose one.
Well, and I appreciate it's better than trying to create a compliment out of a question. So I appreciate being in the position of having to create a question out of a compliment. And I would just say that that heckle worked. I don't know what you said, but it threw me off. So points to you, sir. Well, I'll say this, Madam Speaker. I'll say this, that the problem is that our cheese is being watered down, and the problem with the Liberal amendment was that watering down the motion isn't a way to solve the problem of watering down the cheese, Madam Speaker.
Before I resume debate, I just want to